In the studio today, we're going to paint a watercolor pumpkin. Here's a few supplies you're going to need. Let's get started. We're going to start by using a watercolor wash, which is a 50-50 wash of watercolor paint and water. And we're going to use our round brush to kind of create a very long, oblong kind of oval, almost like a rounded football shape. And then after we paint that, we're going to add a side rib. And what I do to paint that is we're going to actually do a backwards C and then fill in the top part. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go and repeat that on the other side. And we're going to paint now a forward C. And the important thing is to make sure you leave that little bump in the middle there, because that's what's actually going to make it look pumpkin-y. Add more ribs to the side. You can make as many of these as you want. And the thing to remember is that pumpkins aren't perfect. So we don't want perfect lines. We want them kind of wavy and bumpy. You're going to go back with that wash and you're going to just define some of your lines, and we're going to keep layering with this. So we're going to layer with darker and darker paint where the paint is less and less diluted till we get to a darker part. So now this is a terracotta, and with the terracotta paint we're just going to define. Now you see here I'm going back with a clean brush and I'm moving the paint around, and you can use a paper towel to pick up any extra, but that's the important part. If you have something that's a little bit too dark, clean out your brush with paint. Go back with a clean, wet brush and pick up that paint and move it around. A lot of working in watercolor is just about how you move that paint around. So we're going to go back and we are going to repeat all of these steps for each of the ribs. And you can see again, a clean, wet brush after I initially use the paint. See how I'm picking up the paint there? And here's where a lot of beginning watercolor artists don't do, is you actually want to turn your paper when you work. Sometimes it's easier. So you see I flip my paper. I'm a righty, it's easier. If you're a lefty, it could be easier. Don't be afraid to flip your paper around and play with it, play with the positioning with your hand. Clean wet brush here, just moving the paint around, pushing it on a wet surface. This is wet on wet. Adding some additional terracotta. And just moving that paint around. Adding it to the side. And you see I'm just working to define here. So just defining my ribs, making it look a little more pumpkin-y, keeping it light in the center because that creates the highlight for my pumpkin. I'm going to flip this back around. And then I'm going to add some yellow. And what this does is we always think of pumpkins as orange or blue, but the thing is it's lots of micro colors that make up the shading of a pumpkin. So I'm adding this yellow ochre. You can see I'm just blotting up a little bit here to pick up some of the extra paint, but I'm adding this yellow ochre, and that's going to give me a little more depth and dimension. I could have also added a little bit different color orange. You're going to see I'm going to add a little green later when I do the stem, but start adding these colors in because this is what's going to give the believability of it being a pumpkin, because pumpkins aren't just straight orange as we see them with our eye. Just defining a little bit of this top part here using the tip of my brush and a little bit of paint. And pause this video at any time if I'm working a little bit too fast. I have taken out some of the pauses, so go ahead and go back and pause this so you can paint along. You can see I'm using the paper towel as a tool to pick up some excess color, to add some areas of highlights and to remove some water. I'm going to go in and I'm going to add now with my sap green. I'm following the edges of the ribs I created, and I'm just going to go across here at first to get the base of my shape down as I fill in. Now you are going to get some bleeding and blooming into the already wet colors, but that's okay because sometimes pumpkins are a little bit green on the top. And that's how we can kind of get that natural look. And you'll see, because as long as the watercolor is wet, the watercolor paint will continue to move. I'm pulling up to the stem here. The important thing to know about a stem is the stem always kind of has a curve at the bottom. It's always thicker at the base than it is at the top. So your stem should not be one size all the way through. The believability comes in the side difference from the top and the bottom. So make sure if your stem's looking chunky, you keep it skinnier at the top and fatter at the bottom, and you can see how it kind of curves in. I'm adding a little burnt umber here which is blooming into the green to give it a little bit of shadow. And then I'm adding it along the stem. And you see, I'm not being perfect about it. I'm just kind of dotting it in. I'll probably pick some of that water up, but you can see how I'm just kind of dotting that. I'm going to go back now while that sets for a minute, and just with a little bit of the burnt umber, just outline a little bit of the pumpkin to make it pop, and outline a little bit of those ribs to the outer edge, and a little bit along the bottom to create a shadow. And you can see I'm not doing a ton of really exact painting. I'm letting it's still wet, so I'm letting it kind of move into the already wet paint, and it disperses itself out. I'm going to turn this over so I can get the other edge. Again, don't be afraid to turn your canvas when you paint. It makes it so much easier than trying to paint straight on. Just adding some defining marks. And you can already see at the top how that green is kind of beautifully bleeding into that orange and really creating an interesting top on that pumpkin. If I wanted that to bleed even more, I would actually go back with a clean wet brush and kind of add some water to pull it out. You can see I'm just gently feathering in some of these colors, adding some depth and dimension, pulling out some of that green with that brown. This is burnt umber I'm using. And I'm going to add a couple little curly cues, cute little curly cues, and I'm going to turn the paper here so I can do the curly cue on the other side. All right, I'll turn this back around. You can dry this with hair dryer. I prefer to let it air dry. I think it looks better as it continues to bleed into itself. And then you can go back and you can add any other details. You can define some areas. You can add some areas of shading. Again, you can see I added that brown and I went back with a clean wet brush, not dripping, just slightly damp, to pull that color out and smooth out that hard edge. And just as I go back and refine, I can play with this as long as it's wet. Once it's dry, it's a little bit harder. And I'm just toggling between, I don't know if toggle is the right word, but between the terracotta and the burnt umber to just add a little more dimension and depth. And there you go. You can see here's our finished pumpkin. Enjoy, happy painting, and follow me for more.